In this video, we're going to look at every single card that was nerfed in 2023, and we're going to rank them based on how savage that nerf was to the card. So here's the tier list. Okay, so you got the S tier. That's a savage nerf. That is taking a card that is at the top of the meta and taking it all the way to the bottom where it's basically never seen or played again. Now, some of these cards that you're going to see here were reverted and they had their effects change or maybe increase of power. We're not actually going to talk about any of the buffs or the reworks or how the cards have changed up to this point. We're looking at how they were affected when the nerf went live, okay? And then you got the A tier. That's like a pretty big nerf, but maybe the card still found its spot in a few other decks. And then you got the B tier. That's probably your nerfs that have like only a point of power change to the card. So yeah, they dropped in popularity a bit, but they still have their spot in their respective decks. Then you got the C tier. That's like barely changed, didn't really do much to the card. And then you got the D tier, and that's where it's almost a disguised buff. All right, so that's how we're deciding the criteria for these cards. Now, this is pretty lighthearted, so don't take it too seriously. A lot has changed since these cards have been nerfed. It's been almost like 6 months, right? So the first one we're kicking off here is AERO, and we're going to go straight to the S tier. So AERO is in the S tier because before this card was nerfed, it was probably the best 5-drop in the game, and it was absolutely stealing so many cubes. It was insane as a last turn play because it would pull every single card that your opponent played to that location. So you played at a near empty location, you'll pull in 2, 3, 4 cards over there so that they have no power to win the other two. In Marvel Snap, you're trying to win 2 out of 3. Well, AERO made it pretty easy. Now she only pulls the last card that your opponent played. So there's a bit of, counter maneuverability for your opponent to like play, I don't know, maybe their high power thing and then a wasp if they think AERO is about to be played. Now, I think it still has a sneaky little spot in the meta, and it actually did get a slight power increase going up to 8. But for the most part, from where it was to how it dropped in popularity, yeah, we got to put it in the S tier. All right, next up is Beast. So previously, Beast was a 2/2 with the same effect, and it was very, very strong, especially when Kitty Pryde came out and the bounce package became pretty popular, pretty strong. Beast was then changed to be a 3/4, so that's an increase in your energy, but also getting +2 power. I honestly don't think that this changed all that much, which is why I'm putting Beast into the C tier. It's still a crazy good deck. The supporting package with Kitty Pryde and all these other things like Hitmonkey and Angela and all this crazy amounts of power that you can output doesn't really change Beast's viability. Maybe if those cards get nerfed, this is going to see a decrease in popularity, but it's basically the core centerpiece for a bounce deck, making a lot of things cost 0 so that you can play a whole bunch of cards on turn 6, and really either playing that on 2 or 3 didn't really matter all that much. And now having a 4 power body left behind is actually really helpful for the package because it's not wasting a spot on your board. So I feel like Beast deserves the C tier. Okay, next up is Black Bolt. I'm going to put Black Bolt in the B tier because, like I said, there was only a power difference change here. He used to be a 5/8, now he's a 5/7. But a fun little fact about this card is that it originally was a 5/7 when the game launched, when beta was around. It was regarded as one of the weakest cards ever, and buffs were called for constantly. And it took so long until they actually buffed it to a 5/8, and then it only became popular because of Stature, and that combo was nerfed. So that brings me to my next card, Stature, going to the B tier as well. She also lost a point of power, going from a 5/7 to a 5/6. Now, funny enough, this card came out, that combo was available, but it wasn't that popular. Nobody was really running it except for a few smart people. Maybe that's because, it was a 6,000 token card that didn't seem very appealing, so nobody picked it up. She dropped in series, became a little bit more popular. All of a sudden, it was the top deck. Both cards lost 1 point of power, so that was 2 power total to the combo, and it actually affected it a decent amount, but I still think that's a pretty sweet package in that disruptive discard package. Okay, next up is going to be DARKHAWK, and he's going to go to the B tier. So believe it or not, this card hasn't really been changed all that much, despite being at the top of the meta for like as long as I can remember. It was originally a 4/1, and then at some point in January, they nerfed it to a 4/0. A lot of people thought maybe that's a buff to negative decks, but that hasn't really taken off. I think the card is totally fine. It still gets to like 10 plus power easy with the right combination of cards. So I think DARKHAWK is doing just fine. Which, while I keep pairing these up, we might as well put ROCKSLIDE here because, they like to have these combos of cards, like the 2 cards, and they end up getting nerfed if one is too strong or the combo is doing too well. So it's almost like this package combo of cards. You got Black Bolt, Stature, now you got DARKHAWK, ROCKSLIDE, both lost points of power, and it did affect the build slightly, but I still see DARKHAWK, ROCKSLIDE all the time. It's still really good. So yeah, ROCKSLIDE lost a point of power. I kind of hate it, to be honest. I feel like one card dying for the other card's sins is a bit annoying because you don't really see ROCKSLIDE being used anywhere unless DARKHAWK is also in the deck. So anyways, he had to take a hit. DARKHAWK took a hit. They're both still good. All right, next up is the hood. I think this is a really interesting one because I'm going to put it in the D tier, the disguised buff tier, because I think getting -1 power added to this card, yeah, that's supposed to hurt because then you get the demon, it's a 1/6, and then the net difference is like 2 energy, right, for like 3 power essentially. That sounds really bad, but there's a lot of combos that you can do when a card has negative power. For instance, Viper. I think that's a very common application of the hood, is to use the hood and then Viper it over so that your opponent now gets a -3 power card on their side of the board. That combo became 6 power net gains. So in my opinion, I think this is just a buff, and not to mention the other applications of this is using it in a destroy deck where you want to get this destroyed. Now, of course, like when you play it and then maybe your opponent's running armor, they have a better chance of having priority to throw it on that armor so that you can't carnage or anything like that. I could see that hurting, but I think it's few and far between, and more often than not, you're going to get what you wanted out of this card, and the negative power is either not going to matter or it's going to hurt your opponent more than it's actually hurting you. So I'm giving him a buff. Next up is Enchantress. She's going to go to the C tier. I don't really feel like a lot changed here because we went to a 4/6 a week prior to her nerf, which brought her to a 4/5. So really, when you look at the span of like 2 weeks, nothing really happened. We couldn't really evaluate if this was a significant nerf or if the buff was actually significant. A lot of people were putting her in their decks, but a lot of people will do that anyways whenever a buff occurs. So it's hard to really see if that 1 point of power was making a huge difference. So I'm just going to put her in the C tier. Then we have Leader. So Leader is going straight to the S tier. Now I know I have him as a 6/2, but originally what happened, okay, he was a 6/3 and then he changed to a 6/7. Now what changed to his ability is that before he would copy all of the cards that your opponent played that turn on your side of the board. So if you had a power advantage, it was almost guaranteed to win because no matter what they could possibly play, it wouldn't compete with that being matched over on the other side because you already had the 3 power of Leader plus a power advantage, okay? So it was really strong. It took over the meta, so they ended up nerfing it pretty savagely, okay? So what they made it do is that he would only copy cards that were played to the right location of where Leader is. So not only did you have to predict where your opponent's going to play cards, hopefully it was going to be to the right, because if they played to the left, there was no chance to copy it. So there was so much going against this card. It dropped from the top to the absolute bottom, which ended up engaging a rework from Team Second Dinner. They had to change him, bring him back to life, and now he's as you know him today, where he will copy the highest power card that your opponent plays no matter where it is on the board. But that nerf that happened to him back in January, that is the most savage nerf I think I've seen in Marvel Snap's history. So that definitely warrants an S tier. Next up, we have Lizard. So I'm putting Lizard in the C tier. Basically because what happened is they made it so that his ability gives him -4 power instead of -3. But I don't feel like that hurt the card all that much. Even though it was run a lot more before the nerf, and I guess that could warrant buffing it up to the, or putting it up to the B tier. I just think that like with Lizard, you want to remove the ongoing ability, or you want to make sure that your opponent doesn't have 4 cards at the opposing location to really get the value anyways, and him going to a 2/1 or a 2/2 doesn't make a huge difference. So I think Lizard's totally fine. I'm actually really stoked about that change. I thought that was a fantastic nerf, but it's going to go into the C tier because not all that much changed. Then we have Nova, who went from a 1/2 to a 1/1. Yeah, that's the easiest decision in my life. That is a C tier change because basically you want to destroy Nova anyway. So the only way this applies dies is if your opponent throws down Professor X or armor and denies the destroy, or you just play it on turn 6, right? Because you had a 5-drop and then you had like a little bit of energy left over. Nova was the only card, so you play it, and now you have 1 less point of power. But like, come on, let's face it. Like, if you're playing Nova, you want to get him destroyed so that you can get those buffs. So really, like, if he's 1 power or 2 power, not going to change its viability. Honestly, he could probably change to a 0 power and still be perfectly fine. So you get the C tier, my dude. Next up is LOCKJAW. Now, this was really difficult for me to decide where I wanted to put this card. I could have put this anywhere, but I am actually going to go to the A tier. Still a fantastic card, okay? But this was a significant change to LOCKJAW's effect. Before, you could play as many cards as you wanted at the LOCKJAW location, and they would cycle through your deck, which just gave you accelerated chances to getting your Infinite out, or whatever high power cards that you want in the deck to spawn out of the LOCKJAW cycle at that location. Well, now how it works is if you play a card at the LOCKJAW location, that card will cycle, but if you play a second one, it will not. It's only 1 per turn. And let me tell you, I wanted to put LOCKJAW in the D tier because in some ways this is a buff. Let's say I got Wasp and an evolved Hulk in my hand, and I really want to win the LOCKJAW location. I don't want to leave it up to fate of just putting that Wasp and hope it gets me something good. So now with how he's changed, I can play both at that location, guarantee the Hulk stays there, and then the Wasp will cycle into something that's probably better. So like, there's ways where this ends up being a buff, but at the time, if we go back to when this nerf was applied, it was because Thanos was running rampant. And with Thanos, I mean, there was a few other things we're going to get to, but basically what you want to do is you want to play as many stones as possible to cycle through. And I feel like it hurt that deck a lot more than it hurts the current meta deck in the evolution, high evolutionary type of style. So as a result, I thought, well, that's a pretty significant change to the effect of the card. It changes the way you build with him and stuff like that. Still an incredible card. Definitely has not disappeared from the meta, even in a moment's notice. I mean, I could have put this anywhere. Guys, I could have put this anywhere. I wanted to put a D tier. I'm going to leave him in the A tier. Significant change. Changed up the decks at the time without high evo. That was a significant nerf. Okay, then we have Red Skull. Now, Red Skull obviously was just recently buffed, but we're looking at the time that he was nerfed when he got dropped down to a 5/12, which was pretty savage in my opinion. I'm going to put him in the A tier, okay? Now, obviously his ability was changed so that he was giving only +1 to the opposing side, but that really did not matter. You were either removing that ability or you were just looking to stack as much power as possible so that it didn't matter what your opponent played there. And basically they dropped that down from 15 to 14 to 12. He's gone back up to 14 with that +2 power now as you know him, but at the time he went down to 12 to hurt the SHURI combo. And I'm putting it as savage because I just thought it was so savage by Team Second Dinner to keep nerfing this card on repeat without changing SHURI. They had to wait for a patch, but it went like 2 months of just smashing Red Skull down in power before they finally changed SHURI. And then they left him there. They left my dude alone for like a month, and then they finally brought him back up to 14, and he's doing pretty good. But at the time, Red Skull, ouch, that hurt. And the next card joining the S tier is going to be QUINJET. Yes, our little plain boy used to discount all cards that didn't start in your deck by 1. And that was it, right? So if you had a 1-drop, it would go to a 0. But now the way they changed it is he has the minimum of 1 tag added to his text, which is just such a savage nerf because the main utility of this card was to discount a bunch of cheap things so that you could play them on repeat, cycle them through LOCKJAW. I'm looking at you, Infinity Stones, and then just, you know, like even like Maria Hill generating a 1-drop, or Agent 13 sometimes rolls a 1-drop. There's just so many applications where QUINJET was being used that got ruined after this nerf, and I hardly ever see this card played anymore, despite being an ongoing card which could work with like Spectrum and stuff like that. No, it's just like it's totally dropped out of the meta after that change. I mean, there was a bunch of changes that happened to the Thanos list with like LOCKJAW and whatnot. We'd already looked at the LOCKJAW change. There's the Thanos change itself, but I think this was the most savage one to that entire package, which just completely disassembled it. And a few of those pieces are still strong in their own right, but I haven't really seen QUINJET, which is why I'm giving it the S S tier. Next up is Sandman. I'm going to put Sandman in the C tier because basically the nerf wasn't that significant, right? The buff was pretty wild. It went from a 4-1 to a 5-5, and all of a sudden people were running Sandman decks with DR.DOOM. Very, very good list. And then it dropped in power. It went from 5 to 3, and I don't feel like it hurt the deck that much. Now, you could argue that when you play a Sandman deck, every point of power is vital, right? Because you're now limiting the amount of cards that you can now play. So when you actually spend the 5 energies to drop Sandman, it needs to be at an opportune moment where you have an advantage, or Sandman is going to give you that nudge over your opponent at that location so that when you do play DR.DOOM, it's a fairly safe play. So every point of power definitely does matter, but I feel like the core of the card, like the deck that it is played in, doesn't necessarily matter too much about the power. Honestly, I could have put this up to the B tier, but I'm going to leave it at C. Next is SHURI. So obviously we've been talking about SHURI a little bit. So SHURI's going to the S tier. Yes, we're going to put SHURI to the S tier, even though she's making a comeback in her current edition. You can't deny that her change was pretty savage, and she went, guys, she was at the top of the meta for like 2 months. Like every second deck you were running into had SHURI, and when this change happened, did you see SHURI anymore? I feel like it completely dropped off, and not to mention, even if you did see SHURI, people probably forgot it was nerfed and they were playing a card elsewhere, because before you could play SHURI and it would just double the power of the next card you play. Didn't matter where. Now it's location restricted. You have to play that next card at her location, which allows for a bit of counterplay and, you know, kind of awkward line of play from your opponent who's doing that deck. Well, what I saw a lot of, and I made the mistake myself, is that I forgot about the nerf. So I just played a card elsewhere, and then she didn't get the buff, and that was the next card that I played, and it didn't matter what I played afterwards at the location, the ability had expired. So I mean, like, I just didn't see the card at all. She's making a slight comeback now that Red Skull was a bit buffed back to his original state, but for the most part at the time, this was a savage nerf. Savage, yet completely warranted. I want to make that very clear, that just because the cards are in like the S tier or A tier or anything like that does not mean that they were bad nerfs, okay? Maybe a few here and there, but there's these cards were problems, and they had to be changed for like other cards to grow and to shine. So this isn't a matter of me not liking nerfs over the other. This is more a matter of just like how bad that hurt that card. So a clear example of this would be Silver Surfer, right? I love the change to Silver Surfer. Before, he was 3-0, giving +3 power to all 3-drops on your side of the board. It was insane with Wong and whatnot. It was just so much power. It was dominating the meta. And then they changed him to a 3-2 and only giving +2 power to all those 3-drops. That is a significant change. That could accumulate to like 10 power loss for Silver Surfer just being played on that turn 6, right? If you did like a crazy combo. But what I like about this is that he's still a very good card. He still has his Surfer decks. They're just not as oppressive as they once were. So while this was a pretty savage nerf to both his ability and his stat line, funny enough, going 3-0 actually kind of hurt because there was some negative lists running him. For the most part, this was a good change. He's still good, but I got to leave him in the A tier. The next one up is Spider-Man. So Spider-Man went from a 4-3 to a 5-4. I'm putting that in the C tier. I don't feel like it changed the card all that much. It's still that control piece that you want to use on turn 5 to basically lock out your opponent from playing there and win that location. Or in the Galactus deck, you're playing Wave and then Galactus and then Spider-Man, and that combo is still intact. So I feel like Spider-Man's main utility didn't really change, so I'm leaving him there. All right, next up is Leech. So I'm going to put Leech in the S tier. Oh my gosh, I know, what a crazy one. Even though, like, I don't know, there's a lot to be said about his ability. He went from removing the abilities of all cards in your opponent's hand, right? Just like as an on reveal, and now it's a timed trigger that on turn 6, his ability will activate. So he doesn't have that on reveal tag anymore, which in some ways could be seen as a buff because of Cosmo shenanigans and stuff like that. But on the other end, if you cheat him out, which was the best thing to do, now he doesn't do his ability right away. So your opponent can now plan for that big turn 6 change of their abilities in their card's hands. So like there's just too much going against him. I always said for the longest time that the worst part about Leech was him being cheated out. That was the only problem that I saw with this card, with LOCKJAW or just anything like that, even Electro Ramp. Just getting this card out before turn 5 hurt. And now, because it's a time trigger and only happens leading up to the certain point and people can, you know, kind of evaluate their situation and act appropriately, like, you don't see the card anymore. You just don't see the card anymore. And you know what? Is anybody sad about that? I think we're fine. I think actually we're pretty happy that old Leech here made it to the S tier. And let's keep him there. Let's not change him. Leave him be. Next up, we have Sunspot. So I'm going to put Sunspot in the B tier because it's kind of the same effect that the other cards in this tier have. He lost 1 point of power, right? So we're going to put Sunspot there. Used to be a 1/1, now he's a 1/0. Now, it is relatively significant for this card. I do believe it went from being the best 1-drop to being one of the best, right? With Nebula and also Kitty Pryde probably being the best at the moment. But Sunspot, you know, you have to now invest 1 more point of unspent energy to get him to the same power levels that he was previously, and that is no joke. Yeah, of course, High Evo wants to take advantage of that, so it kind of works out in that deck. But for the most part, you know, leaving unspent energy behind is not necessarily what you want to do. That's a missed opportunity to play something else, fill out your curve, and Sunspot kind of takes advantage of missing out and gets a bit of power. But now, just like losing 1 point of power drops him down slightly, but he still dies to Killmonger. So, like, ultimately, I don't feel like it made a huge difference. Speaking of cards that didn't really get all that much changed is Thanos. We're going to put Thanos in the B tier as well with Sunspot right there. Now, I'm putting him in the B tier and not the C tier because the Space Stone, which he generates, was also changed. So his stat line, I couldn't care less about. He went up, he went down. It doesn't really matter. It didn't really change the card because ultimately, you don't really need Thanos for his power output. It's maybe nice after a Lockjaw cycle, but for the most part, who cares about his power, right? Even completing the quest isn't all that big of a deal. What you really care about are the stones, and the Space Stone was changed so that it no longer moves a card away from its location and now pulls in a card to its location, which in my opinion is significantly worse. So between like the Space Stone change and this weird changes to his power total, I thought, you could just leave it at B because I think Thanos as a card is just fine and a lot of the stones are still very powerful. It's a difficult one to really truly evaluate because there's so much going on. It's such a fun card, but I'm going to leave him in the B tier. Next is Wave, and I'm going to put Wave in the A tier for the sole reason that she literally, the change to this card, deleted an entire archetype, and that is Death Wave. That is now dead. Basically, because Wave, she's pretty well the same, but now every time that she is played, the next turn, everyone's cards are going to cost 4. It doesn't matter if you got Sarah on the board. It doesn't matter if your Death is discounted a bunch. Nothing matters. They're going to cost 4. So before, a really nice line of play was to play Wave on 5, and then on turn 6, you would play Death plus Leader, because you could play Leader for 4 and Death was going to cost 0 because her discount would apply after the Wave discount, which was crazy. And that deck was relevant for a very long time until this change. And now you just don't really see it anymore. Now, Wave is still a fantastic card and a necessary card at that. It really hinders the pace that a bounce deck can perform at, right? So if you play this on 5, then your bounce deck is kind of shot in the dark because you can't play that Kitty Pryde plus your Hitmonkey and all these other crazy things. You're stuck at 4, you play 1 card, you probably don't have enough power on the board to really compensate, so it's going to hurt big time. But energy cheat is still an ongoing issue. I would actually like to see Wave, increase in cost maybe, just because of the discounts that she is providing a lot of those slower decks with big cards. But regardless, it was a pretty significant change to that archetype for sure, and overall as a card and how she's used, but she's still strong. So I don't know, I'm going to leave it at A tier. And another one to join her at A tier is ZABU. So when ZABU was changed, it was the best card. This card was insane. It was the season pass card. It was dominating the meta the entire time because it was discounting your 4 drops by 2. Dude, that is so crazy. It used to actually cost 3/2, so it actually got an energy decrease during its nerf. But now it only discounts those 4 drops by 1. But previously, you could play 3 4 drops on turn 6. Dude, that was crazy. So that was a very warranted nerf, but I'm putting it in the A tier, not S, because it was still played after, like not even a week after, like the next day. People are still running some pretty strong lists with ZABU, and you still see it today working really well with that DARKHAWK and ROCKSLIDE package. So I think the card is totally fine. Even after it was changed, it was totally fine, but it was a significant change to the potential that this card could output. So I'm keeping it in the A tier. And then we have She-Hulk. I'm going to put She-Hulk in the B tier because she falls in the same line as these cards in that she lost a point of power. Right? So she was a 6'10", now she's a 6'9". Her ability still works. I think the combo of like playing magic to create limbo and then passing on turn 6 to play She-Hulk and Infinite is still a very strong and viable strategy. Even using Moon Girl to maybe get multiple She-Hulks, losing that bit of power. Yeah, that hurts a little bit. It was always within Shang-Chi range. So like ultimately, I don't feel like there was a significant amount of difference to this card with losing 1 power, but rather just put her in a more healthy position for the meta. The most recent one was DR.DOOM. So DR.DOOM was changed so that his Doom bots are only going to give 4 power, which is a pretty significant change when you think about it, because that's his entire identity, right? Is dishing out those Doom bots. And then you could even compound that with Wong. So like if you get like 4 Doom bots out, that's -4 power, essentially what this nerf did. But in a general case, or in general use, is going to dish out 2 Doom bots to each side, and that's essentially -2 power as a nerf. So I'm going to put him in the A tier. I think that is significant enough to the card. When you look at a net total power that is gained from the effect, you're looking at it previously being a 615, which is just nuts, which also goes to other locations and unplayable locations, so a lot of versatility there. And now to a 613, still having a lot of those upsides, but the power decrease here, I feel like hurts this card a lot more than maybe say the B tier was hurt. It's still too soon to properly evaluate how this is going to change the meta, if it has at all. I still see a little bit of DR.DOOM, but I still feel like that's a LOCKJAW problem and not necessarily a DR.DOOM problem. But time will tell, so this could change in its ranking. It could be a B, it could be an S, probably not, but I'm going to just leave it at A for now. And the last card here that I wanted to talk about in nerfs in 2023 is Galactus. And now I went every which way. I know this is going to be controversial, but my goodness, in my last month of playing this card, I feel that the change to Galactus was a buff. Oh my gosh, I put him in the D tier. It's a disguised buff. It's a change. It's a rework. It's pretty significant, but I feel like the card's in a better spot right now, believe it or not. The +5 power was a big deal. It makes for a lot of turn 6 swings that your opponent might not see coming. It's pretty wild. So previously Galactus, he just had to be the only guy at that location, and he only had 2 power, but he would destroy the other 2, and then you had to follow up afterwards. Now I find you set up for that turn 6, right? Because you have 7 power. You just got to make sure you're the only one there, which was already the case, but you have to be winning that location, which could seem a little bit difficult, but there's a lot of ways to maneuver that. I've seen people do some crazy things with like SHURI, and then Hobgoblin, like moving it around, so like somehow moving it to a location. Like there's just like Iron Fist, so like something like Iron Fist, SHURI, and then Hobgoblin. There's just like some crazy stuff that you can do to get like negative power on the other side and then play Galactus, or just just play at the location your opponent's not committing to. And then it's just easy 7 power. You got your Nimrods out, they go over there, Wolverine, whatever. The reason I'm putting it in the D tier is because I feel like the power level of this card is maybe being dispelled by the fact that Conquest mode came out around the same time. In Conquest, Galactus just isn't going to do as well. It's going to have a difficult time because people are going to figure it out and play accordingly. But Galactus has always been a ladder card. It's always been one of the best decks to run on ladder to gain a lot of cubes because, yeah, you might not draw it, you might not hit the combo, so you retreat and lose 1 or 2 cubes at a time. But when you win like 4 or 8 or at least 2 at a time because you snap before you play Galactus. And I feel like nothing there has changed. If anything, a lot of people don't expect it as much and it can catch people off guard. I don't know. I feel like it's been performing really well, and actually if you look at the statistics on snap.fan, on Untapped GG, like it still shows that this card is performing very well. It's like close to a 60% win rate when drawn or played. Now of course with those metrics, that's how the Galactus deck works, right? So you could be like, well, of course you're going to win when you draw Galactus, but I think that applies regardless, before old Galactus or new Galactus. Like if that was the case, you draw the card, you draw the combo, you win. You don't, you lose. Like that hasn't really changed. So that's why I got to give him a D. He got that plus 5 power. He's getting the D tier. He's getting the old disguised buff. But I understand that could be controversial based on your experiences. But anyways, let me know in the comments below how you feel about nerfs in general in Marvel Snap, how they've been in the last 6 months. We've had Glenn being very vocal and communicating with us about his, ideologies surrounding nerfs, buffs, reworks, changing cards. And I think they've done a very good job, especially with the OTAs and then the big patches every month. It's been exciting. I'm personally a big advocate for changes as a whole, like just all changes. I think it mixes things up. It brings a lot of irrelevant cards into the spotlight and to shine, find their position in the meta when other cards are dropped down that maybe counter them. So I'm just here for all the changes. I think it's a lot of fun, but yeah, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.